My name is Roo. I'm the head of high school here at St Andrews in Bangkok. That's a beautiful picture. That was, as we've just been saying, created by one of our Year 11 students over our recent Songkran holiday in Minecraft. He said it's about 25 hours, 15,000 Minecraft blocks. This is just one view of it. There's a beautiful fly-through we can see. But when we were thinking about a picture for a virtual high school, it seemed like an appropriate picture of a virtual high school. This is Keith.
So Keith Wilson. So my role is learning technologies. So we have two campuses here, a high school and a primary school. So I'm over both. And as you can imagine, with a job in technology, I've been a very popular guy over the last few weeks or months. So we look forward to sharing with you some of the things, the lessons learned and the lessons we're still learning in terms of managing the virtual school.
So on the introduction to the webinar, we had these two questions, trying to balance these two. One is the kind of more practical question about home learning. We've done a lot of things like that. And we're talking here about single loop and double loop learning, which we'll talk more about in a minute. You can see there's question marks there. I don't think it's quite as simple as saying that the practical home learning stuff is single loop and the bigger picture leading and managing in a VUCA world is double loop, but it kind of works. And we'll talk about those in a bit more detail in a minute. And as well as those two questions, something that we'll be talking throughout the presentation is...
so three tensions. So as we were putting this presentation together, there were some themes that came out. And these are three that we thought was worth sort of reflecting on. So the first was called pedagogy v parents. Now, one of the things about virtual school or home learning is, of course, the parents are kind of there in a way, or some of the parents at least are there in a way that they would never be in the classroom. And so how does that then shape what we're doing? Because their perceptions of what goes on in a classroom are perhaps a few decades out of date. So how do we react to that? And that's particularly a challenge when I guess perhaps we're all in fee-paying schools. Parents are somewhat reticent to pay fees for a virtual school experience, and so we are perhaps very keen that they see the value in what we're providing. So that does then bring attention to decisions on pedagogy. Then we've got the classroom pedagogy versus home learning pedagogy. So of course, what works in the classroom might not work in a virtual school environment, and so there's a number of times that will sort of be touched on in this presentation. And then finally, we've got a great metaphor there about swampy lowlands, which Roo will unpack. But essentially, this is about the idea that in educational theory, there may well be sort of technically rigorous solutions to all kinds of problems, but in reality, schools are always in some kind of messy situation where these pure sort of theoretical concepts might not quite fit. But that'll come out again as we go through. So, Roo.
So to start with kind of some of this theory, before we get into the more, our kind of journey over the last 16 weeks. When we were writing the description, I put the word VUCA in there. I'm sure some of you know about this idea of volatile, complex, ambiguous, uncertain. Actually, as we plan this more, we haven't really spent much time on this idea of VUCA. It's an interesting idea, and I'm not sure it's necessarily that helpful, because I think thinking about it a little bit more, it's very easy to say this term has been crazy, but next term will be okay. And I think that leads into Keith keeps flicking through the slides. It's more like this. This is a world of permanent white water. It's not like, oh, remember that COVID-19 term, because last term there was something different, and next term there'll be something different. It's much more. I think this is a better way of thinking, and I think it links into what Keith mentioned earlier. I love Donald Shern. Keep clicking.
Sorry, I'm very slack at clicking.
So Donald Shern, the reflective practitioner, this is where this idea about the swampy lowlands comes from. That you can see, I'm not going to read through the whole slide, but the swampy lowland, and we're dealing with mess. And I think this is a much better metaphor than talking about things being VUCA. But it's always complicated. It's always ambiguous. How do we deal with that? We are not living in this kind of perfect world where we can stop the world and then make some decisions and then let the world carry on. We're making these decisions as the world carries on. It's very complicated. Donald Schoen goes on to talk about this idea of reflective practice now, two different types of reflective practice. So there's reflection on action, which is kind of what we do now, where, like I say, we're looking back over the last 16 weeks, thinking about what we've done, what we've learned, where we go from here. But it's also very important that we, as well as kind of stopping and thinking and reflecting, we get better and better at reflecting in action. So we're doing the reflection as we act, rather than just at the end of the day or the week or the month or the term or whatever. And we'll come back to these ideas a little bit later on. If you want a kind of less academic reference, this is one of my favorites, Bueller. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you can miss it. I didn't show you the video because I didn't know how that would work over video streaming. Again, a constraint of online learning, but I'm sure some of you have seen this, or some of you are too young to remember Bueller in 1986. But this is a very important thing. We've got to stop and look around. We've been stopping and looking around in preparing this presentation. Hopefully it will help you to stop and look around a little bit about your context too, which will be different from ours, which is reflecting that point. We're planning that this is about half us talking through our journey and about half discussion with lots of different ideas in the second half of this webinar. Very much linked to Schoen, and again linked to, we mentioned this earlier, this idea of single and double loop learning. When we're making a decision and then we realize we made that wrong or we want to change it, are we just changing that decision, or are we taking a kind of an extra step back, being a bit more meta, thinking about what are our beliefs and values, thinking about why did we get it wrong, not just what we got wrong, so that we can learn. In this context, we're not just learning about online learning in a pandemic. I'm hoping that we never have to do online learning in a global pandemic again, but we can learn about how our beliefs and values help us to make decisions in this VUCA, permanent whitewater, swampy lowland world that we all live in. So, as I've said, over the next however many slides, we're going to talk through our 16-week journey of this since the first case of COVID-19 in Thailand. Keith will take over for a little bit.
Okay, so yeah, here we are. So we've got a timeline for these slides. You'll see the date in the top left, and we're going to be counting up the cases in Thailand. So we're all loving exponential graphs at the moment. So this is a sort of a journey along one of those graphs. So Thailand at the time was the first country to report a COVID case outside of China. So this was back in January. So, unlike the schools in China, which, had to react very, very quickly, we were already, had some kind of inkling that maybe things would be happening in Thailand. Just to talk briefly about something which isn't directly related to COVID, this was actually to do with air quality. So Bangkok, like many cities, suffers from variable air quality. And we had a situation on the 22nd of January where the government, at very, very short notice, closed all the schools in Bangkok. So I think we were given a few hours notice. And at the time, the government said you would be closed for 2 days minimum, so the rest of the week, essentially. And we wanted to talk about this as a quick example about this double loop learning and how we've, reflected on what we did then, even at the time we were sort of reflecting on it, and how that has then informed our response to COVID. Because we're going to be honest, as an SLT, our response was somewhat messy. Because the news from the government came in late, and in fact one of the key emails from the government departments went to a senior leader who wasn't checking their email, so we didn't actually have the full story, and it turned out that the government hadn't actually asked us to close for 2 days, only 1 day, but by this stage part of the SLT in one campus had already sent out an email to their parents to say we were closed for 2 days. High school was on residential, primary had an inset day. It was a bit of a mess. There was mixed messages. And as an SLT, we were sort of phoning each other late at night, trying to piece together a story, trying to work out what was going on. So it wasn't great. And as part of that, we sort of reflected on it. So, you know, this was an example of an email that went out to parents, which was confused. You know, the primary school is going to be closed, but the high school's open. Different sort of mixed messages going on. But as I say, this idea of the reflective, you know, practitioner, we did as an SLT think about that and made some concrete decisions right there about, okay, we're not going to make significant decisions without calling a full SLT meeting. You know, we then set up the tools to do that anytime, day or night. You know, we decided not to make any serious decisions after 8 p.m. because, or 6 p.m., whatever the time was. And that then helped us, as I say, inform what happened next when COVID became the issue of the day. Okay, so...
as you can see now, a couple of weeks later, there's still only 8 cases in Thailand. And you can see, it feels like you were just talking earlier, this feels like years ago in many ways, but it's 27th of January. This idea of discovery of a new strain of coronavirus, this new thing that no one's really heard of, this was just coming back after residentials. And so the first time we actually talked to parents about coronavirus, and you can see that, so this is the kind of start of our timeline. So as we go through, you can see a little bit later, about a week later, up to 25 cases, still not a huge thing in Thailand. As Keith said, we had a huge advantage over our colleagues in China and Hong Kong and places like that we could see this coming. We also, at this stage, you can see there it says that the school might be closed. It could be coronavirus, it could be air quality again, but let's learn from that experience of the school being closed by air quality. We weren't ready for that. Let's be ready for the next time. So we sat down and started thinking about, okay, how would distance learning work? At that point, we were calling it distance learning. You can see there, we're saying, if we're closed, then we expect teachers to be in school if possible. Let's work through how this might work before we're being told that we have to do it. Let's learn from, like I say, learn from those mistakes last time. Right from the start, we were saying the school's timetable will continue. We sat down and thought about it. As we go through the webinar, you'll see how some things have changed, but actually this is one of the things that we made up in January, and we've still stuck with that in the high school for the last 10 weeks. That's very, very important. But some of the other bits of this have changed hugely. Again, fundamental, everything through Moodle. As we said earlier, we are a Google school, we're a Moodle school. Very much important that what we've done, the way we've dealt with this is very much part of our context. So back to what we said earlier, there's not a right answer. The right answer will be different in different schools. That's very important. But this is the kind of first thinking we did, like I say, at the end of January. Some things that have changed hugely, and you'll see how this has changed hugely. Back in January, we were talking about teachers being available to answer questions by email. That feels like a couple of decades ago now that we were expecting teachers to be answering questions by email from students in distance learning. So now we're coming back a little bit later. Number of cases in Thailand is up to 33. We're coming back after half term. We're starting to react to coronavirus approaching. Temperature screening for every teacher and student arriving in school every day, cancelling sports events, things like that. This is getting closer. And then suddenly on the 23rd, again, an example of what Keith was saying, this is the Ministry of Education telling us on a Sunday afternoon that if anyone's been to China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and Japan, they are now quarantined. This is on the Sunday, not long after half term. Lots of our students and teachers have been to these countries over half term because we're talking about very low case numbers. And suddenly we've now found out that lots of students and teachers are not in school the next day. So we did have to make a decision late on a Sunday evening. Some of them because the students themselves have been in these countries, some of them because their mum or dad has been in this country and not come back and quarantined because they didn't know they had to quarantine. And we entered this run of several weeks with every kind of few days, countries being added to the list, or even sometimes taken off the list, and different students and teachers being in and out of school over the next few weeks. Very, very complicated. So 2 weeks after half term, most teachers and students are back in school, unless students and teachers or parents or teachers' partners have been to countries. Again, countries coming off the list. So we had this time that, again, we felt like this idea of permanent white water. It was changing every couple of days. We were trying to make decisions calmly and sensibly, trying to keep our parents informed about these things, dealing with changing situation. Like I say, almost every day something changed. But also, I suppose the positive of all of this is this was really good practice for all of us. As this was happening, we were getting to see what was how it worked with certain teachers not in school, with certain students not in school, but most of the school teachers and students still in school. We were trying a lot of different stuff, which became really useful later on when suddenly no one was in school. So we revisited the distance learning guidelines. Straight away, you can see Keith's influence on this. You might have gathered this already. I kind of waffled philosophically. Keith is all about the bullet points.
Yeah, so it became obvious that there was a likelihood that schools might close in Thailand. So there was a sense of urgency now, and we were wanting to tell teachers, what to do to prepare. So you can see we created a website. So this was a teacher-facing website that I put together, basically to give everything that would be needed in a shutdown, a sort of one-stop shop. So that, they've got links to the network drives, they've got sort of ideas for running lessons online and so on. So we were also insisting that teachers attend some CPD sessions whilst we were still open. Particularly, we'd realized that Google Meet was going to be our chosen sort of video conference platform because we're a Google school. And so that was one thing I was keen to make sure all teachers had attended a session with me on how to use Google Meet with students. Yeah, so amongst other things, we were taking in information at this stage from some of our sister schools within the North Anglia group, particularly schools in China and Hong Kong that had already been closed for quite a while. So we were getting information from them. One of the issues being to do with pastoral, the importance of keeping up a pastoral side to the virtual school, because at the time we were very much thinking about teaching and learning. Other things that came up through that was the amount of work. So other schools that were already in the virtual school state had realized that students were just not getting through work at the same rate. So we were advising teachers to maybe set about half the work they normally would. We were sort of becoming more aware of the need from ensuring that not everything was online, that students definitely need some time away from the screen, so to make sure there's enough offline tasks for them to do. Then again, this idea of the second, or the double loop learning. We'd already had some experience of students at home and teachers at home because of these quarantines, this complex quarantine situation. So we were sort of reflecting on that and trying to provide advice based on that experience, as well as the information we were collecting from other schools that were closed. And you can already see there's been a bit of a shift here. We were formerly talking about teachers responding on email. We're now saying, well, maybe at least once a week you should have a synchronous live video conference lesson, which again was the state at that time in early March. So we obviously had to come up very quickly with different procedures and policies. Again, we did sort of look around at other schools and what they'd done. This is just one example. We needed a sort of video conference etiquette. So for students and for teachers, how do we run a video conference? How do we observe safeguarding guidelines and so on?
So now we're kind of beginning of March. This list keeps growing. You can see we're now up to about 11 different countries there. And now we're actually getting very, very close to the school being closed. So this is now we're starting to plan ahead. You can see again, basically it's just the list keeps growing until then on the 17th of March. This is when we finally got told that we will be closed for the remainder of the term. At that stage, that was 2.5 weeks. So you can see here, we've changed, this is when we changed it from distance learning to home learning, because we thought it was much more touchy-feely, a much nicer word for it. I think that we had a huge advantage here. We'd been planning this by this stage for 9 weeks. We'd learned, as Keith said, a lot from other Nord Anglia schools, from other schools in Bangkok, where talking about different people's plans, different people's ideas. And I think the other thing is that very important is that we knew at this point, we had 2.5 weeks of this before we got to our Songkran, our Thai New Year holiday. So rather than being closed in January and not knowing how long it's going on for, I mean, we still don't know how long it's going on for, but we knew we had 2.5 weeks. So it was kind of exciting, really, to actually finally get to this point. We'd said all along to our students, to our parents, to our teachers, we're trying to keep the school open as long as we can, while we did all of that learning, while we did all of that thinking. And you can see this is the graph of COVID-19 in Thailand at that point, 17th of March. Still a very, very small number of cases at that point, but you can see that 9 weeks. Thailand's graph is very different from most countries around the world, where to have this 9-week kind of long period between the first case and suddenly things starting to close. So we really feel lucky, like I say, very lucky that we had that 9 weeks, that we managed to keep our community safe during that 9 weeks, and we had all that time to think about it. And then we had 2.5 weeks of, okay, let's go. So on that day, we met all the students in the afternoon. All of them went back to their tutor groups for the last afternoon. We talked about this for them. There's a very student-friendly version of our home learning guidelines. This is what it's going to mean to you starting tomorrow. We did similar for the parents. Very, very clear, so all the parents can see what our expectations are.
And the key thing, yeah, particularly for parents, is it had to be just super simple to navigate. So this is the website that we developed. So it's only got 3 buttons. You know, you're just thinking, oh, what year group is my child? And then that's taking you through immediately to just the key bits of information, which is essentially how you log on to the different systems, which again, we tried to keep as small a number as possible. But this is something that definitely we really appreciated having that time to plan for, because you know, keeping the parents on side is always vital, but particularly in a home learning or virtual school situation is absolutely essential. And providing a kind of a secure, you know, place for them to go where they think, gosh, yeah, St Andrews has got this, this is going to be okay. You know, I'm worried about lots of stuff, but I don't need to worry so much about what my children will be doing in terms of schooling. You can see here, so this is the very first day of closure. This is an email from me. So here I am at 5 in the morning, sort of writing to my colleagues, because in all the sort of preparations that we've been doing for parents and so on, there was a few aspects that we sort of perhaps not quite got fully up and running. But by this stage, we were on board with Google Meet. We were sticking to the timetable. And so this is, I'd worked out a way essentially of running the timetable such that links were served to students and teachers without anybody having to worry about it. So there's just a link that somebody, you know, a teacher or a student clicks on. They don't need to think about their timetable. You know, it sort of updates minute by minute to make sure everybody's in the right place at the right time. And so that was definitely for the first day or two worked really well. In fact, it worked too well because students were found it so easy to join that they were actually, as you can see here, they were joining lessons that the teacher wasn't there, because as Ru indicated, you know, we sort of At the start, we were thinking that teachers would be responding via email. Then we were thinking, well, maybe there'll be a synchronous aspect, maybe once a week there'll be a Google Meet. But then we quickly realized that the students were kind of expecting to have a teacher there. It was a lesson, so where's the teacher? And so we very quickly sort of responded to that, and we discussed it. We did have this this tension with, well, is that the best, pedagogically, to have the students on a screen with their teacher every hour? But that tension then sort of resolved itself in us thinking, well, at least for part of each lesson, perhaps we should be saying to teachers, be there. There was some technical stuff happening at the time, so as we were rolling this out, you can see this is just later that same day. Google had actually responded to teachers' demands and had completely flipped the way they did things. So I don't know if you've been using Google Meet in your own schools, but they introduced the idea of nicknamed meets and gave teachers more control than the students, which up until then, it was a bit of a free-for-all. And so we were reacting very quickly. But again, we were in that sort of zone. We had a sort of a management structure that allowed us to very quickly respond, and a sort of technical side to it that was freed up to really focus on this kind of thing. So even though the tools were changing under our feet literally on the first day, we were able to get up to speed, which was again just gave great reassurance to teachers, to parents, and to students who, we're all very worried at this stage. We're all in a bit of a panic, as I think you'll remember. Is this still me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I seem to be talking a lot. Again, this was one of the other tensions that we sort of highlighted, is this idea about what does it look like? How is online and sort of classroom-based learning different? One of the things that came out really quickly is that, of course, anything that previously we'd been doing online was typically homework, because you're in a lesson, in a classroom, you're actually interacting with the students. And then our online systems were typically more about setting homework. And so we realized that there was a problem here because teachers were setting classwork tasks, of course, through this online system, which meant students were then having dozens and dozens of tasks, and they weren't sure, well, which is homework and which is classwork. Because there is a fundamental difference for a teacher, because something you set in class, you're not necessarily expecting to be completed. You set enough classwork such that your most able students don't run out of stuff to do, basically. Whereas homework is a different matter. You will differentiate it, but you will expect all students to achieve their differentiated outcome. So we had to sort of adapt our systems and adapt our thinking to sort of juggle this. And then at the same time, there's more sort of technical sort of solutions coming out. There was a great developer came up with something called Grid View, which meant that Google Meet could behave a bit more like Zoom and things like that.
So to follow on from what Keith was saying, one of the things I don't think we've talked about yet is these single and double loops are happening at a huge variety of different timescales. So for our first 9 weeks, we were taking a nice long time to think about it, to learn, to whatever. And then as Keith just said, then suddenly on day one, we're learning and changing things very quickly. As I said, we were very lucky. We had that initial time. You can see this is after a week and a half of, you can see now it's officially called the Virtual School Experience. We did a survey of all the students and parents, and we were pretty happy with these scores. You can see, it says it's up there, 72% of parents are pretty happy. Students are not quite as happy. I think they'd rather be sat at home doing nothing. And then also we asked other questions about some of the things that we knew, like the work being set looks like about right. Again, you can see students are saying there's a bit too much work being set, as we might expect. And then this balance of on-screen and off-screen tasks that we knew would be an issue. Again, we were pretty happy with all this feedback we got after a week and a half. But again, this is another example of that kind of chance to stop and think and reflect. Okay, we've got all this feedback. Along with these kind of headline figures, we had hundreds of comments from students and teachers, so students and parents, We had lots of students who had been saying these subjects are setting too much work, rather than just overall, which subjects are setting too much or not enough work, that kind of thing. So it was a great chance to reflect on where we were. That happened in the last week of term. And then again, this idea that we did this for 2.5 weeks, and then we got a chance to kind of stop and let the dust settle for a little bit, and think about, okay, we've done that for 2.5 weeks, where do we go from here?
Yeah, so again, there was technical things happening in the background. So again, lots of developers getting on board with Chrome extensions. So there was this really handy thing about hands up in Google Meet, which really sort of transformed the online classroom experience for a lot of our teachers and students. And then here we are. Where are we here?
Yeah. So now this is like the end of our holiday. Yeah. Obviously, the holiday was a bit strange. Most holidays in an international school, all the students and teachers are flying around the world and then coming back. None of that happened. So we thought this is a real opportunity to kind of reflect on those survey results and on our experiences, all the conversations we've been having. Okay, how do we retweak, relaunch those guidelines, having learned everything we possibly learned from the 2.5 weeks that we did at the end of last term. As we mentioned earlier, and again, I'm sure this is happening in lots of your schools too, a lot of our parents are finding this very difficult at the moment. There in Thailand especially, maybe, tourism is one of the biggest industries in the country. We've got a lot of parents, our St Andrews parents tend to be lots of kind of self-employed duckers and divers. They don't all work for multinational companies. A lot of our parents are finding this very difficult. If they think that the experience they're getting is not great, then they're going to be even more reluctant to pay. But for a lot of them, it's not about reluctance to pay, it's just they physically cannot pay. So we need to make really pedagogically and in terms of the parents, make this the best experience it can possibly be. So what can we do to make it even better? We talked about increased collaboration. Again, there's a big difference between, and again, this is a difference between us and schools who may be in China. We knew for the first time we're going to run this for 2.5 weeks. Let's just go with it and see what we learn. Now we don't know how long it's going to be. We're getting kind of mixed messages from different places. We've just done another 2.5 weeks. This is our half term, which is a bit strange time to have a half term, but Monday and Wednesday were public holidays in Thailand. So again, we get a chance to stop and think. But when we go back to school tomorrow, we don't know how long it's going to be of the virtual school experience from now until we're back in. So let's get teachers collaborating. Let's try and do this sustainably as well as best we possibly can. Building on what Keith said earlier, we're now, since the beginning of this term, every morning has been a Google Meet in registration. It doesn't necessarily mean all the students are there, but it means that we're checking in with those students. The students have got opportunities to check in with that. The green stuff here is our kind of just reinforcing our systems that have always been in place, or we've been telling people. So again, this idea of Moodle, everything's on Moodle, as Keith mentioned. We've got very clear systems for that. We've now said that every Key Stage 3 lesson has to start and end with an interactive Google Meet, even if the students are working offline in the middle of the lesson, the teacher is there. Again, none of the huge shift from those emails, that idea of emailing each other in January. The teacher is now online throughout the lesson. It's so much easier to say, Mr. Roo, I'm not sure about this, and get an instant response to that. That's a huge change. And again, we think it's a huge development pedagogically, but our parents like it too. So sometimes maybe these aren't attention. Homework, again, from our survey we saw, some people are thinking they're on the computer all day and then they go home and, oh, they don't go home, they're home already, but suddenly they're getting homework. Well, how is that different? That's an interesting thing. So again, not a new system, but reinforcing the homework guidelines we've had for a number of years. And then again, more technical things. So this idea of one of the tensions that Keith talked about earlier, how do we make this as much like all the best bits of classroom teaching as possible? One of our common pedagogies in a classroom would be to get students working in different groups, talking in small groups and then pulling them together for a conversation. In Zoom, there's breakout groups that are kind of embedded in Zoom. In Google Meets, we've had different teachers trying different stuff, talking about it, and then we come to a system that works better, and that's happening a lot more. You can see in the middle there, this is one of the things that we're kind of still struggling with. It'd be interesting to see if other people have got ideas for this. Encouraging students to turn their cameras on. At the moment, we're talking to you, we can't see you. You might be asleep, you might be checking in another window, you might be playing Fortnite. We don't know any of those things. How do we make sure that the students are engaged if they're not turning cameras on? It's a difficult question. I was talking to Keith earlier. I did a webinar with Eric Mazur, a Harvard professor, who's one of the people who kind of created flipped learning. And in that webinar, in a Zoom webinar, I was put in a breakout group with someone from a medical school in the Netherlands and a lecturer at McGill, and they were saying our students aren't putting their videos on either. So I think it's an interesting thing. I'd love to hear anyone who's got any ideas about how we can encourage students to turn their cameras on so we can see that engagement. And also, one of the things we talked about, which we haven't mentioned that much, we talked about the pastoral stuff, but all the time when we've been talking about this, we've been talking about the social connection. I think the keeping the timetable is about the kind of the stability for the students as well. But yes, there's some advantages to asynchronous learning, but there's a real advantage to students getting up in the morning and meeting their tutor and being in that first lesson at 8 o'clock that keeps things normal when they're clearly not normal. So here we are today. This is updated today. I'm very sad. I update this graph every day. You can see that curve is clearly flattening. I suppose if Keith moves the video, you can see down the number of new cases is down today, and yesterday is 1 new case in Thailand. There was a bit of a blip a couple of days ago, but in Thailand that curve is flattened. Again, giving us hope that sometime in the next few weeks, we might be able to get back into school. The Ministry of Education are meeting again to discuss this the end of next week. We're not sure whether we're going to open before or after the malls. We'll wait and see. But we're, again, unlike our colleagues in China, we're kind of seeing that this is hopefully a much shorter term thing than missing the whole of term 2, which we know some of you have had. So if we come back to our questions at the beginning, hopefully we've talked about both of the first two. We talked about the practicalities and maybe again, maybe that is closer to the single loop learning. Maybe we've talked about the kind of some of this double loop learning, the bigger picture about learning to deal with these VUCA or permanent white water or swampy lowlands. I think we've talked about these tensions as we've gone through. How do we want to teach about parents' expectations? Sometimes there is a tension there, sometimes the two are agreeing with each other. This idea of how much do we want home learning to be like the classroom? Are there times when it can't be like the classroom? Are there even times when it's better than the classroom? What do we do about that? And then this idea of the context, that so much of what we've described is the St. Andrew's way of doing this. We've learned from other people, but we can't copy each other because different contexts, it's going to be different. We've talked a little bit more than half an hour there, but we've still got about 20 minutes left. So I think the first thing is, has anybody got any questions about any of that? And then we can have a broader discussion of anything that anybody else would like to discuss. It'd be nice if you could be like our students and turn your videos on and join in now. If you finish your game of Fortnite. Anybody have any questions?
So how were the lessons presented?
Sorry, Padma, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, so basically how were the lessons presented? Were the teachers using PowerPoint presentations or recorded videos?
So it's a mixture. So as you saw, one of the things we've ended up with is definitely having a live online component to every lesson. So that will typically only be 5 or 10 minutes, perhaps at the start and end. Sometimes it'll be all the way through, but within that, we're trying to use as wide a range of learning sort of tools and approaches as we would in the normal classroom. That's why we're particularly keen to get group work going, because that's such a natural thing to do in a classroom, but doesn't it took some time, at least for us, to get working with the tools we had available. And then, you mentioned videos, absolutely. Again, that would be used in a normal classroom situation. What other things?
I mean, I think on videos, we've said right from the start that every Google Meet is videoed, partly for child protection safeguarding reasons, but it also means that those are available as a resource. So for myself, for example, I teach year 12 and 13 theory of knowledge. They can go away in their little breakout rooms. I can be recording all of their different breakout rooms. We can come back and have a class discussion, and we can be recording that. And again, depending on child protection and safeguarding, as long as there's no one in that video inappropriately dressed or inappropriately located or anything like that, then it's okay for us to share that video and use that as a learning resource later on. I think, as Keith said, we tended to not do lots of pre-recording of videos, maybe short ones. One of the things I don't think we mentioned yet is Loom, which is something that has been used quite a lot by different teachers working with students, but certainly with teachers going, look, I've just worked out how to do this. This is a cool idea. You can try this too. So all sorts of different stuff. We're all learning from each other and sharing ideas as we go along.
Thank you.
Rue, it's Mark.
Hello,
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
We can see you as well, Mark.
Well, very good. I've got an interesting question. So you said, well, maybe you'll decide if it's interesting or not. You said at the end of towards the end of your presentation that about there might be times where virtual learning is better than live learning and so on. And I just wondered if you'd done any thinking or work around deconstructing what you've been doing in the school to an online context, and just trying to understand if there are sort of chunks that are just different or chunks that are the same but need to be done in a different way, or whether you've just kind of taken normal lessons and tried to do the same sort of thing online. I wondered if you sort of had any thoughts about that.
I mean, I think at the moment it's all kind of happening. I think that's, I mean, again, I mentioned that I was in a webinar with Eric Mazur last night. So one of the things he was saying is, where do we go from, yes, this is a huge change of education. What happens when we come back into schools? Similar to what you're saying, are there things that we're going to learn from this that we'll bring back into school? Are there things here that homework and hope can become more like home learning? That we haven't really started to think about that yet. I think at the moment our focus is on, let's do this the best we possibly can, and that's changing all the time. But to think about how do we bring what we've learned from this back into school, I think we need to start thinking about when we're coming back into school. I think our focus is on very much the virtual school experience at the moment, not bringing those lessons back into the real school experience. But I think, there's definitely going to be some interesting stuff we can have.
I think this goes beyond schools, but one thing I think is that probably every human with access to technology on the planet currently has got much more comfortable in doing online video conference stuff, and so I could see when we come back to real classrooms that homework tasks, our students are going to hopefully be much more keen to kind of, right, should we have a quick Google Meet after school and get together in little huddles, out of their own volition to discuss the homework or whatever. Likewise, I'm hoping that, teachers will continue the thing that they're doing, which is that they've come up with a great idea. Their first thought will be, hey, I'll do a quick Loom about it and share it with my colleagues, because we've all suddenly upskilled a lot with the technology, and there are definitely aspects of the technology which can do things which you cannot do, in a normal, sort of situation. So just two kind of things off the top of my head, really.
And another one we talked about. So we have briefings a couple of times a week so year teams or departments of faculty will get together in the morning. One of the things we found about that is suddenly then you get all the teachers in one place, and now they've all got to run around the school and get back to their tutor bases for 7:45 ready for registration. Well, those could be Google Meet. So if we did Google Meet briefings, all of those tutors are sitting in their tutor bases, having a quick check-in with their team, and instantly they're back in. So the students can start coming in and there are definitely things that we can take from this and bring back into the real school rather than the virtual school.
So interesting. And building on that, what I'm hearing a little bit anecdotally at the moment is that for students, some of our students or groups of students or for particular subject areas, they're enjoying the online learning more, finding it more effective. So maths is an example. Our maths department is saying that actually seeing greater progress for some students because of the way that they're interacting with certain online platforms and because they can sort of do that repeated retrieval practice. And we've also got students who are just much more comfortable working alone and at home. I know it's too early to sort of see any of that within any data, but are you getting a sense of that from any of your students at the moment? Because one of the things I've heard is the older students who tend to like it more.
I mean, when I showed you the sort of our survey results, I mean, we'll do another survey later. What we found was on that survey, actually, we thought it'd be interesting to see what are the differences between the different year groups. But actually, all of the year groups were saying very, very similar things. But remember, that survey was done after a kind of a week and a half. When we go back to our next survey, it's a longer time scale. I think that it will have changed. I think that'd be interesting. I mean, I'm sure some of you have seen that thing in the New York Times yesterday about the student who's like, oh, I have to do all this group work and all my classmates are disruptive and now I can just get on with it on my own.
Yeah, is that?
I'm hoping that doesn't describe St Andrews classrooms. It's also interesting that you're the student who can get your think piece in the New York Times. Maybe you're not that disadvantaged, but we can talk about that.
I guess I'm also thinking of my son who's 9, who really loves the fact that in between his online synchronous lessons at the moment, he can play Minecraft. And he can self-determine the pattern of his day. And that autonomy for him is something he's really valued. And so it's, you know, there's no like overall win, like it's quite binary, you're in school or you're not, but it's maybe how we can keep some of the bits that students are really liking and deconstruct what is it that's working for them. And like you were saying with the tutor groups and doing that from the homeroom to prevent the race across school, keep those aspects back in school, go back.
Yeah, I mean, my son's in year 9, so when I've been working at home and he's been working at home, it's a great insight. Like when I'm in school, I walk into a lesson and I know that this is kind of quantum, isn't it? As soon as I'm in a lesson, the lesson isn't the same as it was before I walked into it. When it's online, I'm getting to see his year 9 experience in a very kind of authentic way because nobody knows that. Nobody's got time to think about the fact that Mr. Rue's son's in my class. And actually, I mean, he was one of the people who said on that first day, oh, we just hung out in a Google Meet all day and the teacher didn't turn up. Oh, great. So I'm getting these insights from him. And it's interesting. So that's really interesting. There's a lot of insights, I think. And again, maybe, like I say, in a future survey, rather than what are we doing right, what do we need to do better, it's a question to ask the students. What would you like us to keep when we get back to school? Let's see what, and again, are they going to say different things? It'd be interesting.
It's so interesting. So much to unpick.
Rue, is there any feedback from your PE department as to how the virtual learning has gone?
I think PE are doing okay.
They're one that's particularly affected by the video issue. So it's interesting that we did touch on the video, we didn't go too much into it, but what we found is that the very first day of virtual learning, around 80%, certainly of Key Stage 3 students had their videos on. They were quite happy to do that. But then, I don't know whether it's peer pressure or what, we've just gradually seen that, you know, go the way of the oil price. And so now we've only got a few % of students who typically put on their video, which is, we're sort of thinking, how can we nudge that? And it's particularly for the subjects, you know, the sort of subjects with any kind of performance aspects, so PE, you know, drama, art, because to run a PE lesson or a drama lesson without the teacher being able to see what the students are doing is well, our teachers are saying it's almost impossible.
And I think, again, this is a really interesting thing that in terms of kind of lessons that we can bring back into school. Because what we've had, when we kind of had these conversations, we're getting teachers saying, well, it's fine for me. And it's like, there's a very different experience if you're an English or maths or science teacher who is, first of all, you're a kind of important subject. You see your students for 3 hours a week. It doesn't really matter if that you can see them or not when they're working on a maths. Maybe they're, like you say, Kate, working on some online thing where they're getting lots of feedback. If you're a drama teacher who's got 15 different Key Stage 3 classes who you see for 1 hour a week, and it's not seen as important by the parents who are sitting in the background, maybe, it's a very different thing. So I think one of the things that we're learning, I think that teachers getting that bigger picture is something that we can learn from this. Yes, you don't need them to get their video on, but imagine if you try and encourage them to get their video on a couple of times, once or twice a week in your maths lessons, how much easier that's going to make your colleagues in their dance lessons. So we can all work together on this. And I think that's really important. That's something that we can definitely learn from this. I think the PE ones, there's lots of stuff happening. Sorry, to come back to your question, swimming are really struggling.
Well, yeah, swimming's obviously something that's going to be a problem. Apparently, it's not the problem with the pool, the actual physical act of swimming. It's the changing facilities and the social distancing that cause a problem there. But I had a Zoom call with various amounts of directors of sports from around the globe, and there's huge concerns about what PE and obviously other subjects are going to look like in the future now. We had a lady come on from China who said the students obviously wear masks now in a PE lesson. They're not allowed to share any equipment. So whether that's a bench or a gym mat or any of the footballs, students bring in their own PE bag. They've got to go away and buy their own equipment to use in lessons. So there's obviously lots of challenges there for when we do get back into school as well.
I mean, so the Ministry of Public Health here has, I think yesterday, told runners not to wear masks because, which is interesting, because they're saying if you're wearing a mask, although we've opened the parks up, parks opened up this week, and people are running around the parks, and before that they were running along the streets, and I got very annoyed when I see people running without a mask on because, again, there's that research that says yes, 1.5 or 2 meters if you're kind of walking and talking. We're about 1.5 meters here. But if you're running, then obviously you're breathing harder, that air is going further. But they're saying don't wear a mask, because if you're wearing a mask and you've been doing physical exercise, then you're breathing differently. Actually, that can be harmful to you. Again, how do you do that? How do you do a PE lesson if people aren't wearing masks and are now having to be 2 meters apart? Well, football could be interesting 2 meters apart. Tennis maybe is okay, but most of us haven't got enough tennis courts to run a PE thing just in tennis or badminton. We need those other sports with lots of people on the pitch at the same time.
Yeah. I guess we'll all be guided by our own ministries, won't we, in terms of what we can do and what we can't do and what their suggestions are.
Hi, I've got a question. A couple of questions regarding safeguarding. So you touched upon the issue of students having the cameras on, and I agree. If the cameras were on, that would solve a lot of problems. So it would overcome a lot of difficulties. But yeah, there is that safeguarding issue of taking images of children. We also I'm from Kuwait, and so we have a lot of, it's very conservative culture. And a lot of parents would not give permission for the camera to be on for their children to be, particularly daughter, to be on camera and being recorded. So does anyone else have that issue there?
So, I mean, this is I think this is partly it's another tension, really. We've said right from the start that cameras are optional, always optional for students. And when we've talked to the students before they went on that day when we closed, and then obviously this is carried on in conversations with their tutors and in wellbeing lessons and things like that, we always remind people that there is that opt-out. If your little sister is running around naked, turn your camera off. You need to be dressed appropriately for a Google Meet. You shouldn't be in your boxer shorts on your bed. That's not appropriate. We're having those conversations. We said to teachers, this is when they're in a Google Meet, they're in your classroom if they're doing something inappropriate, but you can bump them out the meet. And obviously, like I said earlier, before we share any video, it's obviously our job to make sure that video is appropriate. And I think that, like I say, there is a tension here, because if you keep telling people cameras are always optional, then it's hard to then say, actually, yes, they're optional, but we want you to have them on. So when we're having this conversation with teachers, they're going, yes, but they're optional. Or we're getting teachers saying, turn the cameras on. And we're like, no, they're optional, but we're encouraging to have them on. And again, we're encouraging to have them on when there's good educational reasons for them, not because we want to see your bedroom, but because we want to see your happy, smiling face, and we want to be able to see that you're focused on and concentrating, and we want to see who's not sure what we're talking about, like we can in the classroom. So there is a tension there. This is why we're saying they're always optional. The video is we have the copy of, yes. I think that one of the reasons maybe that people don't want to turn their videos on is being screenshotted. But again, that's up to us to deal with, just in the same way as if someone got their phone out in a lesson and started taking pictures of each other, that would be obviously unacceptable. The difficulty is if that happened, we'd see it straight away. We can't know if someone's being screenshotted. We just have to deal with that. Again, be clear about this is inappropriate, and if those issues come up, and we actually haven't had that come up yet, maybe because it hasn't happened, maybe because no one's told us about it, but it's certainly a tension there.
We've also had the issue of, I was just going to say, we've also had the issue of students logging in as somebody else. And again, when the cameras are turned off, we can't control that. And we have had people hack in and claim that somebody else, and then just try and destroy a class with all sorts of foul language and that kind of thing. So they've had to be removed. So has anybody else had that problem where other people have been logging on as students? We use Google Hangouts.
Yeah, so we haven't had that. We had as we said, we're a Google school, so all of our school email addresses are Google email addresses. That means that's what they're using to log in. Their password should be secure. If they're not secure, then obviously because we're a Google school, then we can force them to change their password. One of the things that we've got a complete record of every single interaction, every single login, every single Google Meet, every single chat comment. And if we want to, just like in any other situation, if we want to investigate, we can dive into that record and investigate, and then follow that up with students and parents and things like that. But we haven't had what you're describing happening, I don't think.
No, but one of the good things is we also have an IP address record from both our systems, Google and Moodle. So when that kind of thing has happened before, in the real world, we've been able to use that to sort of try and track down what's going on. But yeah, it'd be interesting to hear from others as well. Tom, you were asking the floor here. So anybody else got insight into that?
Just us. Okay.
Yeah. Context, you see.
Okay, we're 1 minute over.
Yeah. Anybody got, I think we're pretty much time up there. Anybody got any other final thoughts, questions, reflections?
Just one real quick one, and that is that if this COVID continues, and in America they're talking about 12, 18 months or more, and obviously that the problem will come up then of how we can verify that work is students' work, when we're testing. Anyway, that's something that can wait, but I'm guessing that's going to be an ongoing challenge to verify.
Is that website? ExamNet, is it? There's one website that some of our teachers are trying. I think it's called something like ExamNet, which lets you build online exam papers, and as soon as the student changes focus from that window or that tab, they have to request permission to come back in. So some of our maths teachers are using it at the moment, setting up maths kind of exam papers. And like I say, as soon as the student looks away from it, the teacher knows they've looked away and so they can't be doing anything else. Obviously, again, if the cameras are off, there's nothing to stop them having a calculator if you don't want them to have a calculator. There's limits on that, but they can't start Googling answers or things like that. I think at the moment it started off with maths, but I think other departments today is actually, like I say, it's our half term. So today is actually a public holiday in Thailand, but we're having an inset day today, and our head of maths was talking to teachers from other departments about that. Because if you can stop students switching focus, then that would also work for a timed essay in English, for example.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you.
So did you say that exam.net?
I think it's exam.net, or if you, yeah.
Okay.
If you, I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find something similar to that, but it will explain what it is.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think, Kate, what do we do now?
Yeah, you just leave the meeting and it will just download the recording onto your desktop. Thank you so much, Rue and Keith. That was great. I really enjoyed the conversation. And thanks everybody else for participating.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.